Welcome to our Wednesday night Bible study. This is the last week of our summer 2024 Bible study. It's been a fun series to get into, to study, to look at. I hope it's helped you stay in the Word a little bit more this summer. But we are going back to our regularly order of operations, our regularly scheduled programming, I guess, next week. Next Wednesday, we will be back in person at church, Wednesdays at 7 o'clock, and we'll also be here at 7 o'clock as well. But we're going to be in the book of Romans. That's what we're going to be starting next week. Probably one of the most studied books in the Bible, but one I'm still really excited to get into. So we will begin that next week. I hope to see you there. But I want to close out this week by looking at work. Looking at working, because this summer for me personally has been an absolutely insane summer. I was counting up all the times I've preached and taught, and I've taught 26 times, I believe, in the course of 8 weeks, which is a lot for me. It's a lot for anybody. That's a lot. That's about every other day I've taught. And it's a good thing. I absolutely love teaching, but it's been a ton of work. And when you work that hard and that long, you can start to lose some of the things that make you enjoy working. It made me think about an episode of that 70s show. I love that 70s show. Maybe I shouldn't recommend it. I don't know. I loved it. It was what I watched in high school, and my parents, who were kids of the 70s, we bonded through that show. I love that 70s show. But there's an episode where the main character, Eric, he's a high schooler, if you're unfamiliar, and he gets his first job. Now, his dad is a real hard egg. Like, he's somebody who's just always pushing, always coming down hard on his son. He's the World War II Korea vet kind of character. He's a cliche, right? It's a TV show. It's a sitcom. But Eric gets this job at a burger shack, and he's really excited about it because he wants money to be able to afford certain things. And he works, and he keeps missing out on things with his friends. He misses out on trips, and he misses out on going to the movies, and he misses out on hanging out with them. And he's working himself ragged, and he's miserable. He's missing out on schoolwork. He's working himself to death at this job for almost no money. And his dad is such a hard egg, as I said, that he knows his dad will absolutely just eviscerate him if he even thinks about quitting this job. His mom sees how miserable he is. His mom's trying to help him out. His mom's trying to get him to quit, but he knows he's terrified of his dad. And eventually, he works up the courage, and he confronts his dad, and he says, "Dad, I quit this job," thinking that his father's just going to tear him apart. The Red is going to just absolutely mop the floor with him. So disappointed, so angry. And to his surprise, his dad looks at him and goes, "Well, everybody quits their first job." Right? Like, and if you think back to your first job, maybe you got a job in high school like I did. You're excited to get it at first. You're excited for money. And then you work for a few months and you're like, I'm not getting much money. And this job is really hard, or it's not very fun. Like, there's a reason they give it to high schoolers. Like, the thing that we were so excited for at the first, maybe not so excited for after doing it for a little while. That's what we're looking at today. We're going to be in 2 Timothy chapter 4. And this is a letter that Paul, the apostle, is writing to his apprentice, his disciple, somebody that he has mentored in the faith, mentored into a position of leadership, of apostleship, most likely. He is somebody who is leading the charge for the church. And Timothy is working at a church. He is... And don't think in terms of church, because this is the first century. They don't have church buildings. This is very much, he has found a community of people who love Jesus, who have decided Jesus is the Messiah and that he is their Lord, he is their King, and he is shepherding that group of people. So don't think kind of like the modern church where we have a building and we get together and we call that a church. Like, no, this is just the collection of people who love Jesus and serve Jesus. Timothy is shepherding them. And Timothy he's still relatively young, but Paul is at the end of his life when this letter is written. This is kind of like his goodbye. This is him trying to make sure that Timothy knows everything that Timothy can. I'm sure he's told him all the things we read in this before, but Paul's focus here is making sure Timothy has everything he can give him. And Paul wants to see him again. Paul wants to have more conversations, as anybody does when they get to the end of their life. But this section that we're looking at, it's Paul's command to Timothy, his encouragement to Timothy, his admonition to Timothy about working for the Lord. Starting in verse 1, we'll go through verse 5. It says, "Go preach the word." Verse 1 says, "This is my solemn charge to you, Timothy, in the presence of God and the Messiah Jesus, who will judge the living and the dead, and by his appearance and his kingdom." announce the word or preach the word. Keep going whether the time is right or wrong. Rebuke, warn, encourage with all patience and explanation. The time is coming, you see, when people won't tolerate healthy teaching. Their ears start to itch, and they will collect for themselves teachers who will tell them what they want to hear. They will turn away from listening to the truth. They will go after myths instead. But as for you, keep your balance in everything. Put up with suffering. Do the work of an evangelist. Share the gospel. Complete the particular task assigned to you. And as a preacher, this may seem like, well, this is just directed towards me, right? And on one hand, it is directed towards me. Timothy, his job is to share the gospel. It's to shepherd. It's to do the work of a preacher, a minister, an elder. That's his job, which most of those words are the same word, presbyteros. And Paul is telling him, you need to preach. You need to do the work. You need to put up with suffering. You need to put up with struggle. Why? Because there's lives on the line. That all of this is worthy of it. Because Jesus is going to return. He's going to bring about justice for those who suffered. And we want to bring as many people into the fold, into the family as possible. There's no time to be lazy. There's no excuses, even for things like suffering and hardship. And so it's like, yes, this is directed towards a preacher, but it's true of all of us. I mean, Paul says elsewhere that the work of a minister is to equip the saints for the work of ministry, right? Like, think of the body of Christ, the church, the community of people, all Christians as just this big body with different jobs. Like, your finger does one thing, your eye does another thing, your toe does another thing, your knee does another thing. Those things each have their specific role. And the preachers, the ministers, the elders' role is to equip everybody else to do the work of ministry, right? Like that's their primary task. Yes, they will do the work of ministry themselves. It's not an excuse not to. They are part of the church too. But their God-given task is to equip everybody else in the community to be able to do the work of ministry, of sharing the message of Jesus, to do the work of an evangelist, as he says, to encourage people, to show people the truth, to share the message of Jesus, to do all of these things. Like that's the preacher's job. And that's all of our jobs. That's every believer's job, is to share the message of Jesus, to grow the kingdom, to keep moving things forward. And we don't have an excuse. That is what Paul is trying to communicate here to Timothy. He tells him, he says, people are going to turn away. People aren't going to listen. That's not an excuse. He says that there is going to be difficulties. There's going to be struggles. That's not an excuse. That you're going to suffer even. That's not an excuse. I love the way he says it here at the end of this section. He says, keep your balance in everything. So what Paul is not saying here is run yourself to death, right? He says, keep your balance. That's something I think we all need to remember, that we have to be balanced, that if we pour ourselves out too much, there's nothing inside to pour out. We have to keep our balance. We have to continue to make sure that we are healthy mentally, spiritually, that we are poured into as much as we are poured out. Because the work is draining. It can be draining, and it's draining in the best possible way. Just like any hard work is, right? If you work with your hands, if you work a job that you love, yes, it drains the energy cells in you, right? But you love it. It's a good thing. It's a draining in the best way. But you got to keep balance. If you pour yourself out too much, well, then you're not going to have anything to pour out. And so we pick up in verse 6. He says this. For I am already being poured out. Paul saying this again. He says, I'm already being poured out as a drink offering. My departure time has arrived. I have fought the good fight. I have completed the course. I have kept the faith. What do I still have to look for? The crown of righteousness. The Lord, the righteous judge, will give it to me as my reward on that day. And not only to me, but also to all who have loved his appearing. See, this is what Paul is getting at. He's saying, listen, I have reached the end of my race. I've reached the end of the run. I have got to the end of this journey. I am poured out, and Christ is calling me home. Paul is writing this knowing that his death is near, and he's trying to comfort Timothy. But he's not trying to comfort him to say, hey, it's not going to be that bad, or you're going to be okay, or this isn't going to hurt. No, he's saying like, hey, we all get to look forward to this, right? That even if we die, we get that crown of righteousness. And essentially he's saying, like, to all who trust in Jesus, that's Timothy included. He's trying to say, hey, we'll see each other again. He's trying to set the example of how to run this race we call life, called ministry, called being a Christian. And so if we think back to when we first became Christians and we were excited about God, or maybe you're new to this whole Christian thing and you're there right now, that excitement will go away, right? It will fade with time as you pour yourself out more and more and more. If you don't keep your balance, that excitement can be drained from you. And so it's important that we learn this lesson now instead of later when we're poured out. That we have to continue the work no matter what, and we have to keep our balance no matter what. We have to continue to keep ourselves in a position where we can do the work of ministry, of sharing the gospel, of discipling and mentoring others in our lives with the message of Jesus, that being someone that people can follow as we follow Jesus. We have to hold tight to the truth of Christ. We can't allow ourselves to drift to this or that. Your theology should always be expanding and growing, and your understanding of what you believe should be growing and expanding. But truth is truth, and it doesn't change. We may have a different perspective of that truth, but that truth doesn't change, and so we have to continue to grow, but we have to continue to hold on to that truth. And lastly, we should strive to follow that example that Paul sets for us, that we should finish strong. You can start a race, great, sprint. That's wonderful. You can start that new job and be excited about it, but if you finish poorly, it really doesn't matter because nobody remembers how quick you got off the starting line. They remember how you finished. If you have any questions, please reach out. Otherwise, we'll see you next week.